Date, February 27, 2016. Location, Central City. The Johnson family lived in a small, decaying rental house on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood filled with broken streetlights and graffiti-covered walls. The house itself was barely holding together, peeling paint, creaking floorboards, and a roof that leaked when it rained. It wasn't much, but it was home for 12-year-old Ethan Johnson, a bright and determined black boy, his 10-year-old sister Brianna, their hardworking mother Angela, and their father Marcus, whose life had taken a devastating turn. Ethan was no ordinary 12-year-old. He was sharp, resourceful, and mature beyond his years, forced to grow up quickly because of the hardships his family faced. His sister Brianna looked up to him like a hero, even though they both carried the heavy burden of their family's struggles. Angela, their mother, was the glue holding the family together. She worked long hours cleaning houses and taking on odd jobs. Yet no matter how hard she tried, it never seemed to be enough. The bills kept piling up, food was scarce, and the weight of poverty was crushing them. Marcus, their father, had once been the family's backbone. As a skilled mechanic, he worked tirelessly at a local car repair shop, always coming home with grease on his hands and a tired smile. But a tragic accident had left his shoulder permanently injured. It had happened just 3 months ago, when a car lift malfunctioned at the shop, causing a heavy vehicle part to crash down on him. Though Marcus survived, his right shoulder was badly damaged, leaving him in constant pain and unable to work. The medical bills from his injury drained what little savings they had, and to make matters worse, his employer fired him, claiming he was no longer fit for the job. The loss of Marcus's job was the beginning of the family's downward spiral. Without his income, the family fell behind on rent, and Angela's cleaning jobs were not enough to make up the difference. Brianna and Ethan were pulled out of school because the family couldn't afford the fees anymore. Ethan, in particular, missed his school dearly. He loved learning, especially science, and he dreamed of one day becoming an engineer so he could build machines that would make life easier for people like his father. But those dreams seemed impossibly far away now. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, wasn't a man of patience or compassion. He came knocking on their door one evening, his tall, looming figure casting a shadow over their cramped living room. "You're 2 months behind on rent," he said coldly, arms crossed over his chest. "If you can't pay me in 2 weeks, I'll have no choice but to evict you." Angela pleaded with him, tears welling up in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Henderson, give us more time. My husband is injured, and I'm doing everything I can to—" "2 weeks," he interrupted, his voice sharp and final. "That's all you've got. After that, you're out." He slammed the door behind him as he left, leaving the Johnson family in stunned silence. That night, the family sat together around their small dining table, eating the last of the bread and peanut butter they had left. Angela tried to reassure the children. "We'll figure something out," she said, though her voice trembled. Marcus, however, couldn't hide his pain and frustration. "I've failed you," he said, staring down at his plate, his once strong hands now scarred and trembling, clenched into fists. "I can't even provide for my own family." "Don't say that," Angela said firmly, reaching across the table to hold his hand. "You didn't fail us. We're a team, and we'll get through this together." But Ethan could see the sadness in his father's eyes, the same sadness he felt in his own heart. That night, as he lay on the thin mattress he shared with Brianna, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of their situation, the unpaid bills, the eviction notice hanging over their heads, and the sight of his mother crying when she thought no one was looking. Ethan knew he had to do something. He couldn't stand by and watch his family fall apart. "I'll help," he whispered to himself in the dark. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way." The next morning, Ethan shared his plan with his parents. "I want to help," he said firmly. "I'll go to the city and ask people for help. Someone out there has to care." "No, Ethan," Angela said immediately. "I won't have you out there on the streets, begging strangers. It's dangerous." "But what choice do we have?" Ethan shot back. "If we don't pay the rent, we'll lose the house. And if we lose the house, we'll have nowhere to go. I can't just sit here and do nothing." Marcus, who had been silent until now, spoke up. His voice was heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry, son. You shouldn't have to do this. This is my fault." "It's not your fault, Dad," Ethan said, his voice soft but resolute. This is just how things are right now, but I'll fix it. I promise. Angela looked at her son, her heart breaking at the sight of his determination. She wanted to protect him, to keep him safe, but she knew he was right. They were out of options. Be careful, she said finally, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him tightly. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Ethan whispered. And so, with nothing but a tattered backpack and a heart full of resolve, Ethan stepped out onto the streets of the city, determined to save his family from the darkness that threatened to consume them. Ethan's first steps out of the house that morning felt heavier than usual. The world outside wasn't the comforting haven he imagined when he was younger. It was chaotic, unforgiving, and indifferent to someone like him. The city, though alive with activity, wasn't kind to those struggling at the bottom. Cars rushed past in a blur of noise and smoke, and people moved swiftly, their faces buried in their phones or lost in their own problems. No one looked at him, and no one cared about the boy with worn-out sneakers and a patched-up hoodie who was trying to change his family's fate. He walked for blocks, clutching his tattered backpack as if it held the answers to his problems. Ethan's plan wasn't well thought out. He only knew that he had to find help, and he would start by asking people in the bustling streets. He came across a crowded shopping district where vendors sold their goods from colorful carts and storefronts displayed glittering wares. People here looked like they had money, like they wouldn't miss a few dollars. Surely someone would be kind enough to help. Ethan hesitated, standing near a food truck where the smell of hot pretzels made his stomach churn with hunger. His throat felt dry, and his heart pounded as he worked up the courage to approach a middle-aged man in a business suit who was standing nearby, sipping coffee. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan began, his voice timid. The man glanced at him, his brow furrowing slightly. I was wondering if you could help me. My family, we're going through a hard time and—" "Sorry, kid, I don't have time," the man interrupted, already turning away. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, then slowly backed away. His first attempt had failed, but he told himself to keep going. Surely someone would listen. He tried again, this time approaching a woman who was carrying shopping bags. "Ma'am, please, if you could spare just a little, my family—" "Get lost," she snapped, not even looking at him. "I don't give money to beggars." The words stung, but Ethan swallowed the hurt and moved on. He kept trying, person after person, but the rejections came in waves. Some people ignored him completely, pretending he wasn't there. Others told him to leave them alone, their voices harsh and dismissive. A few even laughed at him, mocking his desperate attempts to explain his situation. By midday, Ethan's legs were sore from walking, and his throat was raw from speaking to so many strangers. He hadn't collected a single dollar. The city, so vibrant and full of life, now felt cold and cruel. Ethan found himself sitting on the edge of a fountain in a small plaza, his head bowed in defeat. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, determined not to cry in front of the passers-by. He couldn't let himself give up, not yet. As he sat there, he overheard a group of teenagers nearby, their laughter echoing through the plaza. They were older than him, maybe 16 or 17, and they were leaning against their bikes, eating snacks and joking loudly. Ethan didn't want to attract their attention, but he couldn't help glancing at them out of the corner of his eye. They noticed him almost immediately. "Hey, what's up with that kid?" one of them said, pointing at Ethan. "You lost or something?" Ethan tried to ignore them, but they walked over to him anyway. "What are you doing here?" another boy asked, smirking. "You begging for money or something?" Ethan stood up, clutching his backpack tightly. "I'm just trying to help my family," he said quietly, his voice firm despite his fear. "We're going through a hard time, and that's so sad," one of the girls said mockingly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. The others laughed. "You think people are just going to hand you money? You're dreaming, kid. Why don't you go back to wherever you came from?" one of the boys added. "This ain't the place for losers." Their words were like knives, cutting deep into Ethan's already fragile confidence. He wanted to shout back, to tell them they didn't know anything about him or his family, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. Instead, he turned and walked away, his head held high, even though his heart felt heavy. "Wait! If you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. The day dragged on, and Ethan's spirits sank lower with every step he took. He tried different parts of the city, from the busy downtown streets to quieter residential neighborhoods, but the results were always the same. People either ignored him, dismissed him, or treated him like a nuisance. The few coins he managed to collect barely added up to $1. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, Ethan found himself in a park near the edge of town. The park was mostly empty, with only a few people walking their dogs or sitting on benches. Ethan sat on a patch of grass under a large oak tree, pulling his knees to his chest. He had failed. His family was counting on him, and he had nothing to show for his efforts. For the first time since he left the house that morning, Ethan let the tears come. He cried quietly, his face buried in his arms so no one would see. He cried for his mother, who worked so hard and got so little in return. He cried for his father, who carried the weight of guilt and pain on his injured shoulders. He cried for Brianna, who had to give up her dreams of school and friends because of circumstances she couldn't control. And he cried for himself, a 12-year-old boy who just wanted to make things better but didn't know how. But even as the tears fell, Ethan's resolve grew stronger. He couldn't let this be the end. His family needed him, and he wasn't going to give up. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie and stood up, his fists clenched. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself. "Tomorrow I'll try again." As Ethan walked back home in the dim light of dusk, he didn't realize that his journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test his courage in ways he could never have imagined and change his life forever. The following morning, Ethan woke up to the faint rays of sunlight slipping through the cracks in the window. The room he shared with Brianna felt colder than usual. Brianna was still asleep, curled up under their thin blanket, and their parents' quiet voices drifted from the living room. Ethan's stomach growled loudly, a reminder that they hadn't eaten dinner the night before. There hadn't been anything to eat. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the long day of walking and rejection. But his resolve was intact. Today would be different. Today, he told himself, someone would listen, someone would care. Ethan reached for his hoodie, the same patched-up one he always wore, and slipped it on. He carefully grabbed his backpack, the contents unchanged, just a bottle of water, a notebook, and a few loose coins he had managed to collect the day before. Stepping into the small kitchen, Ethan found his mother standing by the sink, washing a few dishes from the previous night. She turned when she saw him, her tired eyes filled with concern. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" Angela asked softly. Ethan nodded. "I have to try, Mom. We don't have much time." Angela sighed, drying her hands with a dishcloth. "Ethan, I know you're doing this because you want to help, but I worry about you out there. People can be cruel. You don't deserve that." "I can handle it," Ethan said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "You've always told me that sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in. I believe in helping us. I believe in keeping this family together." Angela pulled him into a tight hug, holding him as if she could protect him from the harshness of the world. "You're too young for this," she whispered, "but you've got the heart of a man. Be careful, okay?" "I will, Mom," Ethan promised. After saying goodbye to his family, Ethan stepped outside into the brisk morning air. The streets were quieter at this hour, with fewer people rushing about. It gave Ethan a small sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, this day would be different. He walked toward the busier part of the city, his steps lighter than the day before, his determination renewed. As the hours passed, however, the familiar wave of rejection began to hit Ethan again. He approached a well-dressed woman coming out of a coffee shop, her expensive handbag slung over her shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am," Ethan said, his voice steady. "My family's in a really tough spot right now, and I was wondering if you could spare—" "Not today, kid," she said sharply, brushing past him without a second glance. Ethan tried again, this time with a man carrying a briefcase who was waiting at a crosswalk. "Sir, please." "Get away from me," the man snapped, his tone filled with annoyance. It was the same pattern as the day before. Rejection, dismissal, indifference. Each no chipped away at Ethan's hope. but he refused to give up. He reminded himself why he was doing this. For his mother, for his father, for Brianna. He couldn't let them down. By midday, Ethan found himself on a busy street lined with shops and restaurants. The smell of food wafted through the air, making his stomach ache with hunger. He didn't have enough money for even the cheapest snack, but he pushed the hunger aside and focused on his mission. That was when he heard it, the screeching of tires, the shattering of glass, and a deafening crash. Ethan spun around, his eyes widening as he saw a luxury sports car skid across the intersection and slam into a lamppost. The car crumpled on impact, smoke and flames erupting from the hood. People nearby froze, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen too, his mind racing. The driver! Someone could be inside. His heart pounded as he watched the flames grow larger, licking the edges of the car like a hungry beast. He heard someone shout, "Stay back! That car's gonna blow!" Ethan's gaze darted to the driver's seat. Through the smoke-streaked window, he saw a figure. A woman slumped over the steering wheel, her long hair falling over her face. She wasn't moving. "Help her!" Someone yelled from the crowd, but no one moved. The onlookers stayed rooted to the spot, fear holding them back. Ethan felt his feet begin to move before his mind even caught up. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the wrecked car. "Kids, stop!" Someone shouted after him. "It's too dangerous!" But Ethan didn't stop. The only thing he could think about was the woman trapped inside. She needed help, and no one else was going to do it. When he reached the car, the heat from the flames was intense, making him sweat instantly. The smell of burning fuel stung his nose, and he coughed as smoke filled the air. Ethan peered through the shattered window and saw the woman more clearly now. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and her eyes fluttered weakly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Ethan called out, his voice urgent. She didn't respond. Ethan's hands trembled as he grabbed the door handle, but it was jammed. He yanked on it with all his strength, his arms straining, but it wouldn't budge. The flames were spreading, and the heat was almost unbearable. "Think, Ethan. Think," he muttered to himself. He spotted a large piece of concrete nearby and grabbed it, using it to smash the remaining glass in the window. The glass shattered completely, and Ethan reached inside, careful to avoid the jagged edges. The woman stirred slightly, her eyes half opening. "Please, help," she whispered faintly. "I'm going to get you out of here," Ethan said firmly, though fear gripped him. He reached for her seatbelt, fumbling with the latch. His fingers were slick with sweat, and the buckle was stuck. Ethan gritted his teeth and pulled harder, finally freeing the belt. The woman slumped forward, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She was heavier than he expected, and the angle made it difficult to pull her out, but he didn't stop. "Almost there," he said, more to himself than to her. The flames roared louder, and Ethan heard the crowd shouting behind him. "Get out of there, kid! It's gonna blow!" Ethan's heart raced as he dragged the woman through the window inch by inch. His muscles burned, and the heat from the fire was searing, but he didn't let go. With one final burst of strength, he pulled her free and collapsed onto the pavement, the woman lying limp beside him. Just as they rolled away from the wreckage, a loud explosion shook the air. The car was engulfed in flames, a massive fireball lighting up the intersection. The crowd gasped in unison, their shock quickly turning to cheers as they realized Ethan had saved her. The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, her voice weak but grateful. "You saved me." Ethan nodded, breathing heavily. His hands were scraped, his arms sore, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that she was alive. Sirens wailed in the distance as an ambulance and fire truck raced onto the scene. Paramedics rushed to the woman's side, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. One of them turned to Ethan. "Are you okay, kid?" "That was incredibly brave, but you could have been killed." "I'm fine," Ethan said quietly, though his legs felt like jelly beneath him. As the paramedics worked, Ethan stepped back, blending into the crowd. He didn't want the attention. He just wanted to go home. But little did he know, his actions that day would soon bring the kind of change he never could have imagined. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains of the Johnson family's small house, casting a faint glow over the cramped living room where Ethan sat silently on the worn couch. His clothes were still slightly singed, and his hands were bandaged in places where shards of glass and debris had left small cuts. The events of the previous day played in his mind on a loop. His frantic sprint toward the burning car, the intense heat, the crushing weight of the woman he had pulled from the wreckage, and the explosion that nearly swallowed them both. Ethan couldn't believe he had done it. He had saved someone's life, and not just anyone, a stranger who could have easily died if he hadn't acted. The applause and cheers of the crowd had rung in his ears after the explosion, but he'd left the scene quietly, slipping away unnoticed. He didn't want the attention. He hadn't done it for glory. He'd done it because it was the right thing to do. But Ethan was exhausted. His body ached from the strain, and the lack of food over the past few days didn't help. His mother, Angela, was bustling around the kitchen, her expression filled with both pride and worry. She had been up all night, fretting over Ethan after he came home and told her what had happened. "You could have been killed, Ethan," Angela said, her voice a mixture of frustration and admiration as she poured hot water into a chipped mug to make tea. "Running into a burning car like that. What were you thinking?" Ethan looked down at his bandaged hands. "I wasn't thinking, Mom. I couldn't stand there and watch her die. Nobody else was helping." Angela sighed, sitting down beside him and placing the mug of tea in his hands. "You're just a kid, Ethan. You shouldn't have to be the one saving lives. That's not your responsibility." "But if I didn't do it, she would have died," Ethan said quietly. He looked up at his mother, his dark eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. "I know you want to protect me, but I can't just stand by when something's wrong. I had to do it." Angela shook her head, her heart aching for her son. She couldn't argue with his reasoning, but it hurt to see him forced into situations no child should have to face. "You've got a good heart, Ethan," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But please, promise me you'll be careful. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." "Wait. If you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel." "I promise," Ethan said, though he wasn't entirely sure if it was a promise he could keep. As they spoke, Brianna shuffled into the room, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Her curly hair was a wild mess, and she clutched a small, stuffed animal under one arm. "Ethan, is it true?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Mom said you saved a lady from a car explosion." Ethan scratched the back of his neck, suddenly feeling shy under his little sister's gaze. "Yeah, I guess I did," he said. "That's so cool," Brianna exclaimed, her face lighting up. "You're like a superhero." "I'm not a superhero," Ethan said with a small smile. "I just did what I had to do." Brianna plopped down beside him, her admiration evident. "When I grow up, I want to be just like you," she said proudly. Ethan laughed, ruffling her hair. "You're already better than me, Bri. Don't ever forget that." The day passed quietly, with Ethan resting as much as he could. But something lingered in the back of his mind, a feeling that the story wasn't over yet. His instincts were right. Late in the morning, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside their house. The sound of the engine startled Angela, who peeked through the window and gasped. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "someone's here to see you." Ethan frowned, confused. "Who would want to see me?" Before Angela could answer, the doorbell rang. Brianna scrambled to open it, and there, standing on the porch, was a tall woman dressed in an elegant black suit. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, and a faint bandage was visible just beneath her hairline. Her piercing blue eyes scanned the modest home, and her lips curved into a warm smile when she saw Ethan. "Hello," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "I hope I'm not intruding. My name is Madison Carter, and I believe I owe your son my life." Ethan froze. This was the woman from the car, the one he had pulled from the wreckage. Up close, she looked different than she had in the chaos of the accident. She seemed strong and confident, with a presence that demanded attention. Angela stepped forward, her protective instincts kicking in. "You're the woman from the accident?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Yes," Madison replied. "And I've come to personally thank your son for saving me." Madison's gaze shifted to Ethan, and her smile softened. Ethan, is it? I don't even know where to begin. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be standing here right now. You risked your own life to save mine, and I'll never forget that. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, not used to being the center of attention. I couldn't let you die, he said quietly. I'm glad you're okay. I'm more than okay, thanks to you, Madison said. She stepped closer, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a sleek business card. I want to help you, Ethan, and not just you, your whole family. I know you've been going through a tough time. I heard people talking at the accident scene about how you've been out here trying to support your family. That kind of courage and determination is rare, especially in someone so young. Angela stared at Madison, unsure of what to say. You don't have to do anything for us, she said hesitantly. Ethan didn't save you because he wanted something in return. I know that, Madison said gently. But that's exactly why I want to help. You see, I'm not just someone who works for the FBI. I also have the resources to make a real difference. And I want to use those resources to help people like Ethan. People who deserve a chance at a better life. Ethan blinked in surprise. You want to help us? Yes, Madison said firmly. I want to make sure your family never has to struggle like this again. I want to give you a fresh start. For a moment, the room was silent. Angela looked at her son, then back at Madison. Are you serious? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Completely serious, Madison said. I owe Ethan my life, and this is how I'm going to repay him. Ethan felt his heart race as Madison's words sank in. Could this really be happening? Was their luck finally turning around? Madison's smile widened. Let's start by talking about what your family needs most. And after that, we'll make a plan to change everything. The Johnson family sat in stunned silence after Madison Carter's declaration. The words, I want to give you a fresh start, hung in the air, almost too good to believe. Ethan, Angela, and even little Brianna stared at the sharply dressed woman standing in their modest living room as if she'd just descended from another world. And in many ways she had. Madison exuded confidence and authority, but there was also a warmth about her, a genuine kindness that felt so foreign to the Johnsons after the cold indifference they'd faced from the world around them. Madison broke the silence first. I know this must feel overwhelming, she said, her voice calm and measured. She glanced at Angela, noting the tired lines on the mother's face and the way she seemed to hold herself upright with sheer willpower. I don't want to intrude on your family's space, but I'd like to help in any way I can, and I'd like to start today. Angela blinked, her voice coming out almost as a whisper. Today? Yes, today, Madison said with a nod. She turned to Ethan, who was still sitting quietly on the couch, his hands clasped tightly together. Ethan, what you did yesterday was nothing short of heroic, but more than that, it showed me something about you. You didn't act out of fear, selfishness, or even obligation. You acted because you care, because you want to make things better, even when the odds are stacked against you. That kind of heart and bravery deserves more than just a thank you. It deserves action. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. He looked at his mother for reassurance, and Angela, still in shock, finally managed to speak. You're serious about this? You're really here to help us? I'm very serious, Madison said, her voice unwavering. I've been blessed with resources and opportunities that I know not everyone has. I want to use those blessings to help you rebuild your lives. That starts with addressing your most urgent needs. Angela's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the kitchen table. We've been struggling to pay rent. And my husband, Marcus, he got hurt months ago. He hasn't been able to work because of his injury. The medical bills piled up and we couldn't keep up. That's why we're in this situation. Her voice cracked and she looked away, embarrassed by the admission of their hardships. Madison's gaze softened. Angela, you have nothing to be ashamed of. The system isn't designed to support families like yours, and it's a shame that so many hardworking people get left behind. But we're going to change that. Just then, Brianna, who had been quietly listening, piped up. Are you really going to help Daddy? He can't fix cars anymore because of his shoulder. Madison knelt down to Brianna's level, her tone gentle. Yes, I am. Your dad's been through a lot, and he deserves proper medical care to heal. That's one of the first things I'm going to take care of. Brianna's face lit up with a hopeful smile. You're like a fairy godmother, she said excitedly. Madison chuckled. I'm not magical, Brianna, but I do believe in making magic happen for people who need it. As they spoke, Marcus shuffled into the room, moving stiffly as he held his injured shoulder. His face carried the weariness of a man who had endured too much disappointment, and his dark eyes studied Madison with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. What's all this? He asked gruffly. Angela turned to him, her voice still trembling. Marcus, this is Madison Carter. She's the woman Ethan saved from the accident yesterday. Marcus froze, his gaze darting between Madison and his son. You're the woman from the car? Madison stood and extended her hand toward Marcus. Yes, and I owe your son more than I can put into words. He saved my life, and now I want to help your family. Marcus hesitated, his pride warring with his gratitude. He finally took her hand, his grip firm despite the pain in his shoulder. Thank you, he said simply. Ethan's a good kid. He gets that from his mom. And from you, too, Madison said, meeting his eyes. He told me about how hard you worked to support your family before your injury. That kind of dedication doesn't just disappear, Marcus. I know you feel like the world's been unfair to you, but I'm here to tell you it's not over. We're going to get you the treatment you need so you can start living your life again. Marcus swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. He wanted to argue, to tell her they didn't need charity, but deep down, he knew they did. He nodded, his voice low. I just want to provide for my family again. And you will, Madison said confidently. Madison reached into her bag and pulled out a small tablet. She quickly tapped the screen, taking notes as she spoke. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm covering your back rent. You'll no longer have to worry about eviction. I'll handle it personally with your landlord. Angela gasped. You do that? Madison nodded. Consider it done. She continued, her voice steady and efficient. Second, I'm arranging for Marcus to see a specialist about his shoulder. Whatever treatment or surgery he needs, I'll make sure it's taken care of. Third, I'm enrolling Ethan and Brianna back in school. Their education is non-negotiable. They deserve the chance to learn and dream like any other kids. Ethan's head shot up at the mention of school. You'd do that for us? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Absolutely, Madison said with a smile. You've got a bright future ahead of you, Ethan. I'm going to make sure nothing stands in your way. Angela, overwhelmed with emotion, covered her mouth with her hands. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, This feels like a dream. It's not a dream, Madison said softly. It's a fresh start. Over the next hour, Madison stayed with the family, asking questions about their needs and taking careful notes. She wanted to ensure every detail was covered, from medical care to education to household essentials. She even arranged for groceries to be delivered to their home later that day, knowing how little they had left to eat. When it was time for Madison to leave, she stood at the door and looked back at the family. This is just the beginning, she said. You're not alone anymore. We're going to build something better. Together. Ethan stepped forward, his heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, he said, his voice firm despite the lump in his throat. Not just for helping us, but for believing in us. Madison placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression proud. You believed in yourself first, Ethan. That's what matters most. You remind me of why I do what I do. As the black SUV pulled away from the curb, Angela hugged her children tightly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of hopelessness was lifting. They didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem so dark. The days following Madison Carter's visit marked the beginning of a profound transformation for the Johnson family. True to her word, Madison acted swiftly, ensuring that every promise she made to Ethan and his family came to fruition. For the first time in months, hope seemed to bloom in their small, rundown home. Early the next morning, the first major change arrived in the form of a knock on the door. Angela opened it to find 2 delivery workers standing on the porch holding clipboards. Behind them was a truck loaded with groceries, household supplies, and other essentials. Mrs. Johnson? one of the workers asked with a polite smile. Angela nodded, still unsure if this was real. Yes, that's me. We have a delivery here for you, courtesy of Madison Carter. Angela's breath caught in her throat as they began unloading box after box of food. Fresh fruits and vegetables, loaves of bread, milk, canned goods, meat, things she hadn't been able to afford in months. There were also household items like laundry detergent, soap, and even some new bedding. Brianna squealed in delight when she saw a box filled with her favorite cereals and snacks, while Ethan stood frozen in disbelief. "Mom, look," Brianna said, holding up a box of cookies. "We can actually eat real food again." Angela pressed a hand to her chest as tears welled up in her eyes. She turned to Ethan, her voice trembling. This is all because of you." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "This is because someone finally cared about us." Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived, this time a doctor who introduced himself as Dr. Peterson, an orthopedic specialist. He carried a sleek medical bag and had a warm, approachable demeanor. "Good afternoon, Doctor," Peterson said, shaking Marcus's hand gently. "I was contacted by Ms. Carter to evaluate your shoulder injury. She told me everything, and I'm here to help." Marcus, still grappling with the whirlwind of changes happening around him, hesitated. "You came all the way here for me?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. Dr. Peterson nodded. "Of course. Ms. Carter explained how much this injury has impacted your life. My job is to assess the damage and come up with a treatment plan to get you back on your feet." As Marcus sat down in their modest living room, Dr. Peterson carefully examined his shoulder. He asked questions about the accident, the pain, and how it had affected Marcus's mobility. The process was thorough, but Dr. Peterson maintained a kind and empathetic tone throughout. "Well," the doctor said after completing his evaluation, "it's clear that the injury is severe and there's been significant damage to the ligaments. That's why you're still experiencing so much pain and limited movement. But the good news is, this is treatable. You'll likely need surgery, followed by physical therapy, but I'm confident we can get you back to doing the things you love. Wait! If you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel." "Surgery?" Marcus asked, his brow furrowing. We can't afford anything like that." Dr. Peterson smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry about that. Ms. Carter has already arranged to cover all medical expenses. All you need to focus on is healing." Marcus's hands trembled as he absorbed the news. For months, he had been living with the weight of his injury, believing there was no hope for recovery. The idea of regaining his strength and his ability to provide for his family felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay any of you for this." Dr. Peterson placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's good shoulder. "You don't need to repay me, Marcus. Just focus on getting better." Meanwhile, Madison was busy working behind the scenes to secure the Johnson children's return to school. By the end of the week, Ethan and Brianna were officially re-enrolled at their old schools, and their tuition fees had been paid in full. Not only that, but Madison ensured they were given brand new school supplies, backpacks, notebooks, pencils, and even a fresh set of clothes and shoes. When Ethan saw his new backpack, a sturdy navy blue one with multiple compartments, he felt a strange mix of joy and guilt. For months, he had been out on the streets, feeling like his education was a distant dream. Now, with the backpack in his hands, that dream was alive again. "You ready for school, big guy?" Marcus asked, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "I think so," Ethan said, though he couldn't shake his nerves. "It's been a while." "You'll do great," Angela said, kissing the top of his head. "You're smart, Ethan. Don't ever forget that." Brianna, meanwhile, was practically bouncing with excitement. She hugged her new pink backpack, decorated with tiny stars, and said, "I can't wait to see my friends again. I'm going to tell them all about what Ethan did. My brother's a hero." Ethan blushed, scratching the back of his neck. "You don't have to tell everyone, Bri." "Yes, I do," Brianna declared, grinning. On Monday morning, Madison herself arrived in her sleek black SUV, to personally drive Ethan and Brianna to school. Angela and Marcus stood on the porch, watching as their children climbed into the car, with nervous but excited smiles. "Thank you, Madison," Angela said, her voice filled with gratitude. Madison waved off her thanks. "This is just the beginning. You've got an incredible family, Angela. I'm happy to help." As Madison drove, she glanced at Ethan through the rearview mirror. "So how does it feel to be going back to school?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted honestly. "I'm excited, but I'm also nervous. What if people treat me differently?" Madison smiled. "You're going back as the same Ethan you've always been. Kind, brave, and determined. People might see you as a hero, but that doesn't change who you are. Just be yourself, and everything else will fall into place." Ethan nodded, her words giving him a small sense of reassurance. The day passed quickly for Ethan and Brianna. Returning to school felt strange at first, but it didn't take long for them to fall back into their routines. Ethan's teachers welcomed him warmly, praising his courage when they learned about his heroic act. Though he didn't like being in the spotlight, he couldn't deny how good it felt to be back in a classroom, surrounded by books and learning opportunities. Brianna, meanwhile, chattered excitedly with her friends, proudly telling them about Ethan's rescue. "My brother saved an FBI agent from a car explosion," she said more than once, and the other kids gasped in amazement. When Ethan and Brianna returned home that afternoon, they were greeted with another surprise. Madison was waiting for them in the living room, holding a folder filled with paperwork. "What's that?" Ethan asked, curiosity lighting up his face. "This," Madison said with a grin, "is your family's new lease agreement." Angela's eyes widened. "New lease agreement? I don't understand." "I spoke to your landlord," Madison explained. "I've paid off your back rent, and I've negotiated a new deal with him. You won't have to worry about eviction anymore. And the rent is now locked at an affordable rate for the next 5 years. No sudden increases, no surprises." Angela clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face. "You've done so much for us already. I don't know how we can ever thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Madison said softly. "This is about giving your family the stability and opportunities you deserve." Ethan stood quietly, watching as his family's life seemed to transform before his eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of survival didn't feel so crushing. They had food, a roof over their heads, education, and a path forward. And it had all started because he refused to give up. Life for the Johnson family slowly began to stabilize in the weeks following Madison Carter's intervention. For the first time in months, there was food in the fridge, steady footing under their roof, and a sense of optimism that had long been missing. The change wasn't just financial, it was emotional. The dark cloud of desperation that had hung over the family for so long was lifting, and each of them began to feel lighter with every passing day. Yet what none of them knew was how much more their lives were about to change. Ethan sat on the porch one crisp Saturday morning, a notebook in his lap. He had started carrying the notebook everywhere, jotting down ideas and sketches for the inventions he'd been dreaming about for years, but had set aside when his family's struggles consumed everything. As he sketched the blueprint for what looked like a solar-powered portable charger, his little sister Brianna bounced outside with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Breakfast delivery for the genius inventor," she said with a grin. Ethan laughed and set his notebook aside, taking the plate. "Thanks, Bri. What's gotten into you today? You're extra chipper." "I'm just happy, that's all," Brianna said as she plopped down beside him. "I mean, look at us. We're not worried about what to eat anymore. Dad's going to get better. You're back in school and making cool stuff again. It's like we're normal." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, chewing his toast. "Yeah, I guess it does feel kind of normal. Feels weird after everything, though, doesn't it?" Brianna shrugged. "Maybe, but I like it. And it's all because of you, Ethan. If you hadn't helped that lady..." Ethan frowned slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's not just me, Bri. Madison made all this happen. I just got lucky to meet her." Brianna tilted her head. "It wasn't luck. You're brave, Ethan. That's why she helped us. Because you helped her first." Ethan smiled at his sister, though the weight of her words sat heavily in his chest. He wasn't sure if bravery was the right word. He'd acted on instinct that day, not thinking about the consequences. If anything, he felt lucky that it had worked out the way it did. But as he stared out at the street, his mind wandered. Maybe Brianna was right. Maybe what had happened wasn't just luck. It was the result of never giving up, no matter how impossible things seemed. Later that afternoon, the family received another unexpected visitor. This time it wasn't Madison at the door, but a man in his early 30s dressed in casual clothes, carrying a sleek camera bag slung over his shoulder. Angela opened the door hesitantly, unsure of who he might be. "Good afternoon," the man said with a friendly smile. "My name's Jake Conrad. I'm a reporter with the City Chronicle. I'm here to speak with Ethan, if that's all right." Angela immediately felt a wave of protectiveness rise in her chest. "Why do you want to speak to my son?" she asked cautiously, stepping slightly in front of the door as if shielding her family from whatever trouble this might bring. Jake held up his hands in a reassuring gesture. "I promise, ma'am, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I heard about what Ethan did, saving Madison Carter from that car accident. Word got around, and I thought his story deserved to be shared. I know a lot of people in this city who could use some inspiration right now, and I think Ethan's bravery could really resonate with them." Angela hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to where Ethan was sitting at, the kitchen table still scribbling in his notebook. "He's just a boy," she said quietly. "I don't want people to exploit him or turn this into something it's not." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "I understand, and if you're not comfortable, I'll walk away right now. But this isn't about exploitation, it's about recognition. People should know what he did. Maybe it'll inspire them to be a little kinder, a little braver, and who knows, maybe it could open doors for him in the future." Angela looked back at Ethan again. She could see how much he had grown in such a short time, how much weight he had carried for their family. Maybe it was time for the world to see the strength she had always seen in him. "All right," she said finally. "But if he doesn't want to talk, that's the end of it." Jake smiled gratefully. "Of course. Thank you, ma'am." Ethan sat at the table, his brow furrowed as Jake explained why he was there. "You want to write about me?" Ethan asked, incredulous. "Not just about you," Jake clarified. "About what you did. About how, even though you were struggling, you risked everything to save someone else. It's a rare thing, Ethan. People need to hear about it." Ethan scratched the back of his head. "I don't know. I don't like attention." Jake smiled. "I get that, but this isn't just about you. It's about the message your actions send. Sometimes one person's story can ripple outward and inspire others to do good. Think about it. If someone else sees what you did and decides to help someone in need, and then that person helps someone else, it all starts with you." Ethan thought about it for a moment. He didn't like the idea of being in the spotlight, but he couldn't deny that the thought of inspiring others to do good felt important. He glanced at his mom, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Okay," Ethan said finally, "but keep it real. Don't make me sound like some kind of superhero or anything. I'm just a kid who didn't want to see someone die." Jake grinned. "Fair enough." The article, published a week later, spread like wildfire. Titled "The Boy Who Braved the Flames: How a 12-Year-Old Saved an FBI Agent," it told the story of Ethan's courage in vivid detail, highlighting his determination and selflessness. Jake had also included a section about the Johnson family's struggles and how Madison Carter had stepped in to help. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the city reached out to show their support, sending letters, donations, and even offers of assistance. Strangers stopped Ethan on the street to thank him for what he'd done. A local nonprofit organization offered Marcus a position as a mentor for at-risk youth once he recovered, inspired by his story of resilience. Angela began receiving offers for better-paying jobs, and Brianna proudly showed the article to her classmates, beaming with pride over her brother's bravery. But the biggest surprise came when Madison called a few days later. "Ethan," she said over the phone, "you might want to sit down for this." "What is it?" Ethan asked nervously. "After that article came out, a tech entrepreneur reached out to me. He owns a company that develops educational tools for kids, and he was so inspired by your story that he wants to sponsor you. He's offering a scholarship, full tuition for college whenever you're ready." Ethan nearly dropped the phone. "What? A scholarship? For real?" "For real," Madison confirmed. "And not just that. He also wants to mentor you personally. He saw some of the sketches you've been working on and thinks you've got serious potential as an inventor. Ethan sat there in stunned silence. College had always seemed like an impossible dream, something far beyond his family's reach. Now it was within his grasp. "You earned this, Ethan," Madison said gently. "Your courage opened doors not just for your family, but for yourself. The future is yours now." As Ethan hung up the phone, tears welled up in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt like the weight of the world wasn't crushing him anymore. Instead, the future felt wide open, full of possibility and hope. Life for the Johnson family had transformed in ways they could never have imagined. Ethan still woke up every morning, feeling like everything that had happened was some kind of surreal dream, one he was afraid might slip away if he blinked too hard. But every time he walked into their now-stocked kitchen or saw the way his dad smiled a little brighter despite the pain, Ethan knew it was real. It had been weeks since Madison Carter entered their lives, and yet her influence continued to ripple outward, touching not only the Johnson family, but also the people around them. The article in the City Chronicle had cast a spotlight on Ethan, and while he still wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention, he couldn't deny the good that had come from it. One Saturday morning, the family gathered around the small dining table for breakfast. Plates of pancakes, scrambled eggs, and fruit covered the table, a rare feast for the family not too long ago. Angela served Brianna another helping of pancakes, laughing as her daughter piled on an unnecessary amount of syrup. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his arm in a sling after undergoing the surgery Dr. Peterson had arranged for him just days earlier. His recovery was still in the early stages, but already he felt like a new man. "You're gonna drown those pancakes, Brianna," Marcus teased, shaking his head. "You might as well drink the syrup straight." "I would if Mom let me," Brianna shot back with a cheeky grin. Angela chuckled as she sat down with her own plate. "You're lucky we have syrup at all, young lady. Don't make me regret letting you have extra." As they all laughed, Ethan couldn't help but smile. This was what he'd been fighting for. Moments like this, where his family could just breathe, laugh, and enjoy each other's company without the constant shadow of struggle looming over them. Halfway through breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Angela glanced at the clock. Who could that be this early on a Saturday? She wondered aloud, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she got up to answer it. When she opened the door, she was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. Standing on the porch was Madison Carter, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a group of people, each holding something: boxes, folders, and even what appeared to be a large rolled-up blueprint. Several vehicles were parked along the street, their logos indicating they belonged to a variety of organizations. "Madison?" Angela asked, stepping back in surprise. "What's all this?" Madison smiled warmly, stepping inside as the group behind her began unloading their items. "Good morning, Angela. I know this is unexpected, but I have a surprise for you and your family. Can we come in?" Angela glanced back at her family, who had all stopped eating, to watch curiously. Marcus struggled to his feet, his face a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Ethan stood too, already sensing that whatever this was, it was big. Of course," Angela said, stepping aside to let them in. As the group filed in, Madison turned to the family, her smile widening. "I know I've already promised you a fresh start, but I wanted to do something even bigger for you, something that will not only change your lives, but also show you how much your story has inspired people." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Madison gestured toward the man carrying the rolled-up blueprint. "This is Michael," she said. "He's an architect, and he's been working with me on a special project for your family." Michael stepped forward, unrolling the blueprint and spreading it across the dining table. Everyone leaned in to get a better look, and what they saw left them speechless. The blueprint depicted a house, a beautiful, modern, two-story home with spacious rooms, large windows, and a backyard. It wasn't just a house, it was a dream. "Wait, if you support racism, comment 55. If you stand against it, comment 77. If you've faced racism, let us know and share your story with us at our email in the channel description. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel." "This," Madison said, pointing to the blueprint, "is your new home. Construction is already underway." The room went completely silent. Angela's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. Marcus gripped the back of a chair, his legs suddenly feeling unsteady. Brianna let out a gasp, her wide eyes darting between the blueprint and Madison. But it was Ethan who broke the silence. "A new house?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Madison nodded. "That's right. I wanted to make sure your family had not just a place to live, but a place to thrive, a space where you can grow, dream, and create new memories. You've been through so much, and it's time for you to have a home that reflects the amazing family you are." Angela was openly crying now, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "Madison, we can't accept something like this. It's too much." "It's not too much," Madison said gently. "It's exactly what you deserve. And before you say anything else, I need you to know that this isn't charity. This is an investment in a family that has inspired me and so many others. Ethan's story isn't just about heroism. It's about resilience, determination, and the love you all have for each other. You've shown the world what it means to never give up, and this is the least I can do to honor that." Angela collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. Marcus moved to her side, resting his good hand on her shoulder. He was silent, but his eyes shone with unshed tears. I don't know what to say," Angela whispered finally. "Thank you doesn't feel like enough." "You don't need to say anything," Madison said with a smile. "Just enjoy it." "Oh, and there's one more thing." Everyone's heads snapped up at that. "There's more?" Brianna asked, her voice filled with childlike wonder. Madison chuckled and gestured toward another woman who had been standing quietly in the background. She stepped forward, holding a folder and a laptop. "This is Karen," Madison explained. "She's a career counselor and financial advisor. She's going to be working with you, Angela, to help you secure a long-term, stable job that aligns with your skills and goals. She'll also help you manage your finances so you can build the future you've always wanted." Angela stared at Karen, her lips trembling. You're going to help me find a job?" Karen smiled warmly. "Not just any job, a job that pays well, provides benefits, and gives you the stability you deserve. We'll work together to find something that fits your needs." Ethan watched as his mother broke down again, overwhelmed by the generosity being shown to their family. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for Madison, but for everyone who had come into their lives to make this possible. "Ethan," Madison said, turning to him, "this all started because of you, because you refused to give up. Remember that, okay? You're the reason this is happening." Ethan nodded, tears stinging his eyes. For once, he didn't shy away from the praise. He didn't deflect or downplay his role in their journey. Instead, he stood tall, letting himself feel the pride he had earned. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady, "for everything." Madison smiled. "This is just the beginning, Ethan. You and your family have so much to look forward to. The best is yet to come." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for the Johnson family, filled with moments that seemed too incredible to believe. It was as if their lives had suddenly shifted into an entirely new chapter, one filled with hope, stability, and the promise of brighter days ahead. Construction on their new home moved rapidly, with teams of workers tirelessly building the house Madison Carter had promised them. Every time Ethan passed by the construction site, he would stop and stare, watching the house take shape. It was more than just bricks and wood. It was a symbol of everything they had overcome. Madison had been right. It wasn't just a house. It was a place where they could dream again. One crisp morning, Angela, Marcus, and the kids stood outside the construction site with Madison as one of the contractors invited them to step inside for the first time. Ethan's heart raced as they walked through the front door, the scent of fresh paint filling the air. The house was nearly complete, and even in its unfinished state, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The living room was spacious, with large windows that let in natural light, making the room feel warm and welcoming. The kitchen was modern, with sleek countertops, shiny appliances, and enough space for Angela to cook meals comfortably, something she hadn't been able to do in their old cramped kitchen. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, each one thoughtfully designed with comfort and privacy in mind. Brianna squealed with delight when she saw her room, painted in soft pink and decorated with tiny star-shaped decals on the walls. "This is my room?" Brianna asked, wide-eyed as she spun in a circle. "It's so big." "It's all yours, Bri," Madison said, smiling warmly. "You can decorate it however you like." Brianna hugged her mom tightly, tears forming in her eyes. "I love it, Mom. I can't believe we're going to live here." Angela wiped her own tears, her voice shaking as she turned to Madison. It's beyond anything we could have ever dreamed of. You've given us more than a home. You've given us a fresh start." Madison placed a comforting hand on Angela's shoulder. "You've earned this, Angela. All of you. You've shown strength and resilience in the face of impossible challenges. This home is just the beginning." As the days passed, the house neared completion, and life outside of the construction site continued to blossom for the Johnson family. Angela, with the help of Karen, the career counselor, had finally secured a new job. She had started working as a manager at a local nonprofit organization that provided support for struggling families. A job that not only paid well, but also gave her a sense of purpose. For the first time in years, Angela could stand tall, proud of the work she was doing and the stability it brought her family. "I feel like I'm actually making a difference," Angela told Marcus one evening as they sat together on the porch of their rental house. "And it's all because someone believed in us." Marcus nodded, his arm still in a sling, but his spirits much higher than they'd been in months. "It's amazing what a little bit of hope can do," he said. "I'm proud of you, Angie, and I'm proud of Ethan. That boy's got more courage in his little finger than most grown men." Angela smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "We're lucky to have him." Ethan, meanwhile, found himself thriving in ways he never expected. Returning to school had been a challenge at first. After months of being away, he worried that he'd fall behind or struggle to fit back in. But to his surprise, his teachers and classmates welcomed him with open arms. The article about his heroism had circulated widely, and while he wasn't entirely comfortable with the attention, it came with some unexpected benefits. "Hey, Ethan," one of his classmates, a boy named Jason, said one afternoon as they worked on a group project. "That thing you did with the car? That was crazy, man. You're like a real-life superhero." Ethan shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I'm not a superhero. I just did what anyone else would have done." Jason shook his head. "Nah, man. Most people would have run the other way. You're different. You're like brave or something." The words stuck with Ethan, not because they inflated his ego, but because they made him realize something important. He had the power to make a difference. Whether it was saving someone in a burning car or helping his family through tough times, his actions mattered. And that realization gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He threw himself into his studies with a determination he hadn't felt before, excelling in science and math, his favorite subjects. His teachers noticed the change in him, often commenting on his focus and drive. One of them, Mr. Reynolds, even pulled him aside after class one day. "Ethan," Mr. Reynolds said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, "I don't know what your plans are for the future, but you've got the mind of an engineer. If you stick with it, I have no doubt you're going to do something amazing one day." Ethan smiled shyly. "Thanks, Mr. Reynolds. I've been thinking about that a lot lately." "Good," Mr. Reynolds said with a grin, "because the world needs more kids like you. Kids who don't just dream, but make things happen." Back at home, Marcus's recovery was progressing well. The surgery Dr. Peterson had performed on his shoulder had been a success, and with the help of physical therapy, Marcus was regaining strength and mobility. Though he wasn't quite ready to return to work, the nonprofit organization that had offered him a position as a mentor for at-risk youth was patient, waiting for him to fully heal before he started. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this," Marcus admitted to Angela one evening as they prepared dinner together. "Helping kids who are going through tough times, it feels like something I'm actually meant to do." Angela smiled as she handed him a plate. "I think it's perfect for you. You've been through so much, and now you can use that experience to help others. It's like you're turning all the pain into something good." Marcus nodded, his gaze drifting toward the living room where Ethan and Brianna were sitting together, laughing as they worked on a puzzle. "Yeah," he said softly, It's all worth it if it means they get to have this. The day the Johnsons moved into their new house was one they would never forget. Friends, neighbors, and even some of the people who had been involved in the construction showed up to celebrate with them. Madison was there, of course, smiling proudly as she handed Angela the keys to the front door. "Welcome home," Madison said warmly. Angela's hands shook as she took the keys, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you," she whispered. "You already have," Madison replied. "Your family's story has inspired so many people, myself included. Seeing you thrive is all the thanks I need." As they stepped inside, the Johnsons were greeted with even more surprises. The house had been fully furnished, with thoughtful touches in every room. Ethan's room was decorated with a science and technology theme, complete with a desk stocked with supplies for his inventions. Brianna's room was filled with books, toys, and even a small telescope so she could stargaze at night. Marcus and Angela's bedroom was a serene retreat, offering them a space to rest and recharge. Ethan stood in the middle of his new room, running his fingers over the smooth surface of his new desk. He turned to Madison, who had followed him upstairs. "This is amazing," he said softly. "Thank you." "You earned it, Ethan," Madison said, "and I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in his life, the future didn't feel like an uphill battle. It felt like a wide-open road, filled with possibilities he was finally ready to chase. The Johnson family's first night in their new home was like a dream. After the excitement of moving in and the flood of well-wishers who had come to celebrate with them, they found themselves sitting together in their brand-new living room, surrounded by the soft glow of the overhead lights. For once, there was no immediate worry about rent, no gnawing hunger, and no lingering sadness over lost opportunities. There was only laughter, love, and the quiet hum of possibility in the air. Angela had cooked a proper dinner for the first time in what felt like years. A roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a side of green beans. It wasn't fancy, but to the Johnson family, it felt like a feast. They ate together at their new dining table, laughing as Brianna accidentally knocked over her glass of juice, and Marcus cracked jokes that made Ethan groan and roll his eyes. The warmth of the moment settled over them like a blanket, a reminder that after all the struggles, they had finally found peace. The weeks that followed brought even more change for the Johnsons. With the stability of their new home and the support they'd received, each member of the family began to flourish in their own way. Angela thrived in her new role at the nonprofit organization, where her hard work and dedication didn't go unnoticed. She quickly became a trusted and respected leader, known for her empathy and ability to connect with struggling families. Her boss often praised her for her resilience and work ethic, and Angela found herself filled with a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. One evening, as she sat on the couch with Marcus, going through some paperwork for work, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be working at a nonprofit, living in this house, and actually looking forward to the future, I would have laughed in their face." Marcus smiled, leaning back against the cushions. His arm was out of the sling now, and while he was still in physical therapy, his strength was returning day by day. "It's funny how life works," he said. "Sometimes you just need one person to believe in you for everything to change." Angela reached over and squeezed his hand. "I still can't believe how far we've come, and it's all because of Ethan." Ethan, meanwhile, had fully embraced his role as a student and budding inventor. His return to school had reignited his passion for learning, and he poured his energy into his studies, especially in math and science. Mr. Reynolds, his science teacher, quickly became his mentor, encouraging Ethan to think outside the box and explore his ideas. One day after class, Mr. Reynolds handed Ethan a flyer for a statewide science and engineering competition. "I think you should enter this," Mr. Reynolds said. Ethan stared at the flyer, his heart racing. The competition promised scholarships and recognition for young inventors who presented innovative ideas. "You really think I have a chance?" he asked. Mr. Reynolds smiled. "I don't think you have a chance, Ethan. I know you do. You're one of the smartest and most resourceful students I've ever taught. If anyone can come up with something brilliant, it's you." Ethan's mind began to race with possibilities. That night, he sat at his desk in his new room, sketching ideas in his notebook late into the evening. He felt alive in a way he never had before, as if the world were finally opening up to him, showing him all the opportunities he'd once thought were out of reach. With Madison's encouragement, Ethan submitted his application to the competition and began building his invention. A solar-powered portable charger designed to be affordable and accessible for low-income families. He poured hours into the project, using the small workbench Madison had gifted him, and when the day of the competition arrived, he presented it with confidence. When the judges announced his name as the winner, Ethan felt a surge of pride and disbelief. The scholarship he received would cover his college tuition in full, and the recognition from the competition opened doors he hadn't even known existed. Local businesses and organizations reached out to him, offering mentorship opportunities and even funding to develop his invention further. As Ethan began to step into his future, Marcus found himself doing the same. His new role as a mentor for at-risk youth quickly became a calling. At the nonprofit where he worked, Marcus shared his story with young boys who were struggling with poverty, family issues, and feelings of hopelessness. His honesty and compassion resonated deeply with them, and he became a trusted figure in their lives. One afternoon, as he sat with a group of teenagers in a small classroom, one of the boys asked, "How'd you get through it?" "All the hard stuff?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "It wasn't easy," he said. "There were days I felt like giving up. But then I looked at my family, at my wife, my kids, and I realized they were worth fighting for. And you know what? So are you. You might not see it now, but you've got a future waiting for you. You just have to believe in it and keep pushing forward." The boy nodded, his eyes shining with a glimmer of hope. When Marcus returned home that evening, he told Angela about the conversation. "It feels good," he admitted. "Helping those kids. It's like all the things we went through weren't for nothing. Maybe I went through it so I could help them." Angela smiled. "I think you're right," she said. "Everything happens for a reason." The family's new home quickly became a hub of warmth and joy. Brianna invited her friends over for sleepovers, something she'd never been able to do in their old house. Angela and Marcus hosted small gatherings for their neighbors and co-workers, filling the house with laughter and good food. And Ethan often worked on his inventions in his room, occasionally emerging to show his family his latest creation. Madison remained a constant presence in their lives, checking in regularly and offering guidance whenever they needed it. She had become more than just a benefactor. She was a friend, someone the Johnsons could rely on no matter what. One evening, as the family sat together on the back porch, watching the sunset over their new backyard, Madison joined them, holding a glass of lemonade. "This is nice," Madison said, gazing out at the horizon. "Peaceful?" Angela nodded. "It is." "I can't thank you enough, Madison. You've given us more than a home. You've given us a second chance." Madison smiled. "You gave yourselves that chance. I just gave you a little push. The rest was all you." Ethan looked at Madison, his voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been on that street that day? If I hadn't run to the car?" Madison met his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "I do," she admitted, "but I think things happen the way they're meant to. You were exactly where you needed to be, Ethan. And because of that, you didn't just save my life. You changed your own." Ethan smiled, leaning back in his chair as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had control over his future. The struggles of the past hadn't broken him. They had shaped him into the person he was meant to be. And as he sat there, surrounded by his family and the people who had believed in him, he knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come. The Johnson family's journey wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the transformative power of kindness. From the ashes of their struggles, they had built a life filled with hope and possibility, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is always light waiting to be found. Sure to like this video, subscribe for more real stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep the fight for justice alive.